Hello and welcome to my podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, author of Cornwall In Verse, To Tor In Poetry. This show is about slowing down, listening closely, and discovering the poetry that lives in both the extraordinary and the everyday. Each episode, I begin with a guest poem, something from the wider world of poetry that's inspired me or continues to resonate. Then I'll invite you, the listeners, to suggest future guest poems, and after that, I'll share one of my own pieces too. Today, we are stepping into the mist. We are walking the boundary lines between the known world, the world of harvest, of granaries, of warm hearths, and the other world, the realm of myth, magic, and the unexplainable. When we think of folklore in the landscape, we often think of stories tied to specific rocks or rivers, but there is a certain mood, a certain atmospheric pressure that poetry captures better than any guidebook. For this theme, there is one poet who stands as a titan of the Romantic era, a man who understood the perilous beauty of the imagination like no other, John Keats. The poem I have chosen is perhaps the quintessential ballad of magical encounter and the haunting aftermath of touching the sublime. It is La Belle Dame sans Merci. Written in 1819, a year of miraculous productivity for Keats, this poem is a ballad, a form that mimics the old folk songs and oral traditions of the countryside. But Keats infuses it with a feverish, dreamlike intensity. The title translates to The Beautiful Lady Without Mercy. It tells the story of a knight at arms, a figure of strength and chivalry, found wandering alone in a desolate landscape. It is late autumn or early winter. The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. It is a landscape of silence. In this silence, the knight recounts his encounter with a mysterious lady in the meads, a faery's child. It is a narrative of seduction, not just romantic, but the seduction of the magical world, and the devastating emptiness one feels when returned to the mundane reality. As you listen, pay attention to the setting. The landscape here is not just a backdrop, it is a mirror for the soul. The cold hillside is as much a state of mind as it is a geographical location. Keats masterfully weaves the natural world, the squirrel's granary, the fading rose with the supernatural, creating a space where we are never quite sure what is dream and what is reality. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has weathered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms, so haggard and so woe-begone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a faery's child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. I made a garland for her head, and bracelets too, and fragrant zone. She looked at me as she did love, and made sweet moan. I set her on my pacing steed, and nothing else saw all day long. For sidelong would she bend and sing a faery's song. She found me roots of relish sweet, and honey wild and manna-dew, and sure in language strange she said, I love thee true. She took me to her elfin grot, and there she wept, and sighed full sore, and there I shut her wild, wild eyes with kisses for. And there she lulled me asleep, and there I dreamed, woe betide, the latest dream I ever dreamed, on the cold hillside. I saw pale kings and princes too, pale warriors, death pale were they all. They cried, La Belle Dame sans Merci, they hath in thrall. I saw their starved lips in the gloam, with horrid warning gaped wide, and I awoke and found me here, on the cold hillside. There is a haunting circularity to this poem that always leaves me shivering. We begin with the question, "Oh, what can ail thee, knight at arms?" And we end with the answer, which is simply the state of being there alone on the cold hillside. The narrative travels into the realm of magic and is violently ejected back out, leaving the protagonist in a state of purgatory. Let's look closely at the landscape Keats paints. It is a landscape of ending. The sage has withered from the lake. Sage is a water plant, usually green and vibrant, but here it is dead, brown, retreated. No birds sing. This silence is profound. In folklore, the absence of birdsong often signals the presence of the supernatural, a hush that falls before a visitation. But here it also signals the season. Winter is coming, the harvest is done, the squirrel has filled its granary. Life has retreated underground or indoors, yet the night remains outside, exposed. He is out of sync with the natural order. Keats uses the imagery of the body to reflect this landscape. The lily on thy brow suggests paleness, death, but also the dampness of the fever dew. The fading rose on the cheek, he is becoming part of the withering flora. He is being consumed by his memory of the encounter. The encounter itself is a masterpiece of ambiguity. The lady is a fairy's child. She is of the landscape, but not of the human world. Her gifts are roots of relish sweet and honey wild and manna-dew. These are raw natural elements. She does not offer him bread or wine, the products of human civilization. She offers him the wild earth itself. This is a common trope in folklore. To eat the food of the fae is to be bound to their world, or to be forever changed by it. But notice the communication gap. And sure, in language strange she said, I love thee true. The knight assumes she said she loves him, but in a language strange. Did he project his own desires onto her incomprehensible words? Is this a poem about a malicious enchantress, or is it about the tragedy of two beings from different realities trying to connect? She weeps in her elfin grot. Why? Is she trapping him? Or is she mourning the fact that he cannot stay? Keats leaves this open. We are left with the wild eyes, untamable, unreadable. The cold hillside is the ultimate destination. It is the hangover after the ecstasy. It represents the return to the mundane world after touching the divine or the magical. For Keats, who was nursing his brother through TB and facing his own mortality, this poem is often read as an allegory for the wasting disease. But in the context of our theme, myth in the landscape, it speaks to the power of place. There are places in the British Isles, ancient turmili, stone circles, lonely valleys, where you feel a sense of otherness. You feel that if you stayed too long, if you ate the wild honey, you might wake up 100 years later, or wake up to find the world has lost its colour. Magic here is not twinkling and gentle, it is perilous. It drains the life from the night. The pale kings and princes are the warnings of history, the accumulation of all those who sought to grasp the ungraspable. And yet, despite the horror, the knight remains loitering. He cannot go back to the castle, to the harvest, to the squirrel's granary. He has seen the elfin grot. He has been touched by the myth. And once the landscape has revealed its magic to you, the ordinary world is never quite enough again. That is the danger and the beauty of folklore. From the cold hillside of Keats' imagination, we move to a very real, very tangible place that is steeped in its own magic. We're heading to the north coast of Cornwall, to the village of Boscastle. This is a place I visited some years ago and it left an indelible mark on me. Boscastle is situated in a steep, narrow ravine where the Valency Valley meets the sea. It is famous for its picturesque harbour, its history of smuggling, and notably, it is home to the Museum of Witchcraft and Magic. There is a palpable sense of energy there. The cliffs are dark slate, jagged and imposing. The sea churns with a ferocity that demands respect. But it is also a place of modern history. The devastating flash flood of 2004, which tore through the village, washing cars and buildings into the sea. My poem, simply titled Boscastle, tries to capture this duality, the ancient mystical reputation of the place and the raw physical power of the nature that shapes it. As you listen to this piece, picture that crooked harbour. It isn't a straight line to the sea, it twists like a snake, a natural defence against the Atlantic storms. Picture the Valency Valley, lush and green, stretching inland, a place that feels like it belongs to the Piskies and the Spriggans of Cornish lore. I wanted to explore how a landscape accumulates stories. We layer our myths over the geography, the witch's lore, but the geography itself has a voice. The river, the storm, the stone, they speak a language older than our legends. And when the flood came, it was as if that ancient voice roared back into the present. Yet the village rebuilt. The gardens bloomed again. There is a resilience in Boscastle that feels in itself like a kind of magic. So here is Boscastle, where cliffs lean close and waters churn. The harbour waits for tides to turn. A crooked path, a witch's lore. The sea spells secrets on the shore. The valley bathes in moss and mist, each stone by storm and story kissed. A raven arcs through salted air, its cry a charm both dark and rare. The flood once came with roaring might, yet Boscastle held through fear and night. Now gardens bloom where torrents ran, as testament to heart and hand. So walk the edge where legends grow, where time moves slow and rivers know that magic lives in quiet grace and Boscastle keeps its sacred place. In writing this, I wanted to start with the claustrophobia and the intimacy of the harbour, where cliffs lean close. If you've ever stood on the harbour wall at Boscastle, you know that feeling. The land seems to embrace the sea or perhaps constrain it. It creates a cauldron effect. A crooked path, a witch's lore. The shape of the harbour is distinctive, but the mention of witch's lore is a nod to the village's identity. It is a place where people go to seek connection with the esoteric. The sea spells secrets on the shore, the foam writing on the sand, a language that is erased and rewritten with every tide. It suggests that the land is constantly communicating, if only we know how to read it. The second stanza moves inland to the valley. The valley breathes in moss and mist. I wanted to personify the landscape here. The dampness, the greenery of the Valency Valley is intense. It feels alive. The raven is a bird heavily loaded with mythological significance, often a messenger, sometimes a portent of doom, but also a symbol of wisdom and protection in Celtic lore. Its cry a charm both dark and rare. The soundscape of Boscastle is dominated by the water and the birds. The raven's cry cuts through the mist, grounding us in the mystical lore. Then we must address the trauma of the landscape. The third stanza deals with the flood. The flood once came with roaring might. The 2004 flood was a terrifying event, a wall of water. It felt like a mythical beast had been unleashed, but the focus here shifts to the human response. Yet Boscastle held through fear and night. The magic of the place isn't just in the ancient stones or the museum's collection, it is in the community, a testament to heart and hand. The rebuilding of Boscastle was a monumental effort. It is a reminder that while nature is powerful, the human spirit's attachment to place is also a formidable force. We belong to the land and we fight for it. The final stanza brings us to a resolution. So walk the edge where legends grow. I invite the reader to physically be there, to walk the coastal path, where time moves slow and rivers know. The River Jordan and the River Valency meet there. Rivers are often seen as knowing entities in folklore. They have memory. They carry the history of the hills down to the ocean. The poem concludes that magic lives in quiet grace. It's not always about flashes of lightning or supernatural apparitions. Sometimes magic is just the endurance of a village. Sometimes it is the quiet grace of a garden blooming in the silt where a torrent once ran. Boscastle keeps its sacred place, not just because of its history, but because it is loved and tended to. It is a collaboration between the wild earth and the human heart. We've spent a good deal of time today discussing the ancient, the mystical and the timeless. It might seem like a jarring shift to move from the witch's lore of Cornwall to the algorithms of Silicon Valley, but this is the reality of the modern creative life. We are poets living in a digital world. We are makers of quiet things, trying to survive in a noisy marketplace. Today, I want to talk about something many writers struggle with: using Facebook and social media in general to promote your books and your work. I often hear from fellow writers who feel a deep resistance to this. They say, "Alden, I write poetry to escape the noise. I don't want to be a salesperson. I don't want to shout about myself." And I understand that deeply. The temperament that leads us to sit on a cold hillside and write about fairies is rarely the same temperament that enjoys self-promotion. But I would like to offer a reframing of what marketing actually is. Think of the town square. In the old days, if you had a story to tell or a song to sing, you went to the village green, you shared it. Facebook is, for better or worse, the modern town square. It is where the people are. Marketing your poetry isn't about shouting, "Buy my book," over and over again. It's about lighting a small fire in that square and inviting people to sit by it. So how do we do this authentically? How do we use a platform like Facebook without losing our poetic soul? If you follow my page, North Yorkshire in Verse, To Tor In Poetry, you know I post a lot of photographs of North Yorkshire. The moors, the dry stone walls, the sheep in the mist. I don't always say, "Buy my book" in those posts. I simply share the view. Visuals are powerful. People scroll through Facebook looking for a pause, a moment of beauty in a sea of arguments and advertisements. Give them that moment, post a beautiful photo of the place that inspired a poem. Let the image stop the scroll. Then, in the caption, share a few lines of the poem. You're giving them a gift, not a sales pitch. If they love the feeling of the post, they will eventually seek out the book. People connect with people, not just text. Use Facebook to pull back the curtain. If you wrote a poem about a storm in Boscastle, tell the story of that day. Did you get soaked? Did you lose your notebook? Did you meet a stranger? These micro-stories create a narrative around you as the author. It helps your readers feel that they are on the journey with you. When you eventually say, "This poem is in my new collection," they feel invested in it because they know the origin of the story. Join Facebook groups. They are incredibly powerful. But don't just join writers promoting writers groups. Those are often just echo chambers of people selling to each other. Instead, look for groups that align with your themes. If you write about folklore, join the folklore, myth and legend groups. If you write about the coast, join the coastal walking groups. Share your work there, respecting their rules, of course. You are finding your readers where they already hang out. A person in a Lovers of Cornwall group is much more likely to buy a book of Cornish poetry than a random person scrolling through their feed. Just like the tides in the harbour, consistency matters. The algorithm, that mysterious beast, favours regularity. You don't have to post 5 times a day, but try to show up a few times a week. It reminds people you're there. It builds a rhythm. If you disappear for 6 months, it's hard to build momentum again. Think of it as tending a garden. A little bit of watering every few days is better than a flood once a year. When you do need to mention your book, do it gently. I like the soft sell approach. Instead of buy now, limited time, try something like, if you enjoy reading this poem, there are 50 more like it in my collection, North Yorkshire in Verse, To Tor In Poetry. It would mean the world if you checked it out. It's polite, it's inviting, it respects the reader's intelligence. And finally, poetry is meant to be heard. Facebook actually loves video. You don't need a studio. Just prop your phone up against a stack of books, sit by a window with good light and read a poem. Let people hear your voice. Let them see the passion in your face. It creates an intimacy that text on screen cannot match. It's the closest we can get to a live reading in that village hall. Ultimately, promoting your work on Facebook is about connection. It's about saying, I saw this beautiful, sad or magical thing and I wrote it down. Maybe you need to hear it too. If you approach it with a spirit of generosity rather than desperation, it ceases to be a chore. It becomes an extension of your art. It becomes another way to cast your spell upon the shore. Now you've listened to one of my poems and I've discussed how to use Facebook pages for book promotion, I'd love to hear from you. If there's a poem you'd like me to feature as a guest poem in a future episode, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. It could be a classic, something modern, or even a personal favourite that means a lot to you. This way, the podcast becomes a shared journey. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Until next time, may you find poetry in the everyday, and I shall speak to you again on Wednesday.